There was medicine long before there were doctors, hospitals, or a single written word explaining how any of it worked, and you probably wouldn't recognize it as medicine if you saw it happening. This isn't just a story about old remedies, it's the story of how humans learned to keep each other alive long enough to become who we are today. Picture it plainly. No germ theory, no antibiotics, no sterile operating rooms, no anesthesia, no understanding of what a virus even was. A single infected cut could kill a healthy adult in days. Childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for young women. And yet, populations didn't just survive, they grew. Generation after generation lived long enough to raise the next one. That shouldn't add up. Not if no medicine really meant no medicine at all. But that's the wrong assumption to start with. Ancient humans weren't stumbling through disease and injury on luck alone. They had systems tested, refined, and passed down that did real, measurable work keeping bodies alive. We just don't call it medicine anymore, because it doesn't look like the version we're used to. It looked like plants. It looked like maggots. It looked like people simply refusing to let each other die alone. Start with the most basic question: where did this knowledge even come from? Long before anyone could explain why a plant worked, humans were already using it like it did. Chimpanzees swallow specific rough leaves whole to physically scrape parasites out of their gut. Elephants seek out particular tree bark to induce labor. Self-medication isn't a human invention. It's older than humans themselves. Humans just got remarkably good at it. Researchers studying Neanderthal remains in Spain found hardened dental plaque preserved well enough to analyze 50,000 years later. Inside it, archaeologist Karen Hardy and her team identified traces of yarrow and chamomile 2 plants with almost no nutritional value, but well-documented bitter medicinal properties. A Neanderthal with a dental abscess appeared to have been chewing them anyway. Not for taste, for relief. That plant wasn't eaten by accident. Somebody, at some point, tried it while sick, noticed it helped, and passed that information on mother to child, elder to hunter, until certain plants became known, reliably, as the ones you use when you're hurt. That's a pharmacy. It just didn't have a building. Across nearly every ancient culture archaeologists have studied, the pattern repeats. Willow bark, which contains a compound almost identical to modern aspirin, shows up in remedies from Sumer to Egypt to Native American medicine all independently. Nobody shared a textbook. They arrived at the same answer because the plant actually worked, and working knowledge survives. By the time you get anywhere near written history, humans already had thousands of years of accumulated botanical data, held entirely in memory and practice. No labs, no peer review, just an unbroken chain of, "This helped me, so I'm telling you." That explains pain relief. It doesn't explain how anyone survived something far more dangerous, an open wound. Brace yourself, because one of the most effective ancient wound treatments involved letting maggots eat you alive on purpose. Maggots only eat dead, infected tissue. They leave healthy flesh alone. Healers across multiple continents, from Aboriginal Australian communities to Southeast Asia, independently noticed that wounds left with maggots healed cleaner and faster. They weren't wrong. Military doctors deliberately used medicinal maggots during World War I, and the practice is FDA cleared today, for the same reason it worked 10,000 years ago. Honey tells a similar story. It's naturally acidic, low in moisture, and produces trace hydrogen peroxide, a hostile environment for bacteria. Egyptian medical texts prescribe it directly onto wounds, and modern lab testing confirms it inhibits bacterial growth. Nobody in ancient Egypt knew what bacteria were. They just knew which wounds got infected and which didn't. Then there's the strangest example, trepanation. Deliberately drilling a hole into a living human skull, with stone tools, no anesthesia. It sounds like a death sentence. But archaeologists have recovered skulls showing clear bone regrowth around the opening, proof the patient survived and lived for years after. Some skulls show 2 or 3 separate scars, meaning the same person went through it more than once and kept coming back. That's not luck. That's applied knowledge, tested on real people, refined enough to trust again. If any of this is surprising you, that's usually a sign there's more worth digging into. This channel goes looking for exactly these kinds of overlooked stories, so it might be worth sticking around for what turns up next. None of this, the plants, the maggots, the surgery, worked in isolation, though. It all depended on something bigger, other people actually being there to do it. It's easy to miss. The most important ingredient in all of this, not the plant, not the procedure, but the person standing next to the patient. Isolating someone with a contagious illness, bringing food to someone too injured to hunt, keeping a wound clean day after day until it closed. None of that required scientific understanding. It just required people willing to do it consistently. The clearest proof comes from a Neanderthal skeleton known as Shanidar 1, found in a cave in Iraq. He had a crushed and healed arm bone so severe the arm was likely useless, leg damage that would have affected walking, and partial blindness. By any modern measure, he couldn't have hunted, foraged, or defended himself. Yet the bones show he lived for years after, well into old age for a Neanderthal. That's not survival by individual toughness. That's not possible alone. Someone had to have been feeding him, protecting him, keeping him alive long after he could contribute nothing in return. Anthropologists studying Shanidar 1 point to exactly this sustained, deliberate group care. That single detail quietly rewrites what ancient medicine means. It wasn't only substances and procedures. It was also a social technology behaviors a group commits to, generation after generation, that function exactly like medicine, even though they never touch a wound. Compassion, in the most literal sense, kept people alive. That care system explains how people survived long-term disability, but it doesn't explain what a full, working medical toolkit looked like in one person's hands, and for that, there's a body that answers the question almost too perfectly. This is where the story stops being general and becomes personal. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found a body frozen and preserved for over 5,000 years, and what he was carrying changed how historians thought about ancient medicine entirely. His name, given by researchers, was Ötzi. He died around 3,300 BCE, and the cold preserved him well enough that scientists could examine his skin, his organs, even his stomach contents. But it was what he carried that mattered most. Tucked into his gear were 2 pieces of a fungus called birch polypore, known to have mild antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. It's not decorative, it's medicine, packed deliberately, the way you'd pack painkillers for a long trip. Then, researchers found something even stranger on his skin, 61 tattoos, made by rubbing charcoal into small cuts, not for decoration. When scientists mapped their locations, they weren't scattered randomly. They clustered on his lower back, knees, and ankles, joints later found, through CT scanning to show early arthritis. Those locations line up strikingly closely with points still used in acupuncture today, a practice most assume started in China centuries later. Whether or not this was formal acupuncture, something similar was likely already being practiced in Europe, for pain, 5,000 years ago. Sit with that, a man walking through the Alps 5,000 years ago, in chronic pain, carrying antibacterial fungus and bearing targeted pain treatments etched into his own skin. That's not primitive. That's a person actively managing his own health with the best tools available, using knowledge that existed before he was even born. If a detail like that sticks with you, it's worth turning notifications on for this channel. These are exactly the stories that tend to surface here. Ötzi is proof this wasn't scattered guesswork. There was a working system, plants sourced for specific ailments, techniques applied to specific pain, knowledge organized well enough that one man could carry a functioning toolkit into the mountains. The question now is how something that specific held together and spread it all. None of this the plants, the maggots, the trepanation, Ötzi's fungus survives on its own. Knowledge doesn't sit around waiting to be used twice. Somebody has to catch it, remember it, and hand it to somebody else. In societies without writing, this job usually fell to specific people healers, elders, midwives who accumulated more of this knowledge than anyone else and were trusted to apply it. Anthropologists studying present-day hunter-gatherer and indigenous communities, whose knowledge systems closely mirror how ancient humans likely operated, have documented healers holding structured knowledge of hundreds of plant species, which part to use, what dose, what it treats, and what it shouldn't be mixed with. That last part matters more than it sounds. Getting a remedy right isn't just about finding something that helps, it's about not accidentally poisoning someone. Many medicinal plants are toxic in the wrong dose. Refining that boundary took generations of careful, sometimes fatal trial and error, made reliable only because it was recorded not on paper, but in memory, ritual, and story, repeated precisely enough that nothing got lost. Oral tradition, in this light, wasn't just storytelling, it was infrastructure. A song or set of ritual steps that seems purely ceremonial might actually have encoded exact preparation instructions, or dosage a format built to survive being repeated thousands of times without a single written word. This is also why so much of it eventually vanished. When a healer died without passing everything on, knowledge that took hundreds of generations to refine could disappear in a single lifetime. Ethnobotanists today describe this as an active, ongoing loss, not ancient history, but something still happening right now. Which raises an obvious question. How much of what was once known has already been lost, and how much actually made it into the medicine used today? This isn't a closed chapter of history. It's the foundation of the medicine sitting in your bathroom cabinet right now. That willow bark chewed by a Neanderthal in pain. Independently discovered across Sumer, Egypt, and Native American medicine, its active compound was eventually isolated in the 19th century into what became aspirin, still one of the most widely used drugs on the planet. Morphine traces back to opium poppy use documented in Sumerian texts thousands of years old. Quinine, the first effective malaria treatment, was learned by European colonizers directly from indigenous knowledge in South America, where it had been in use for generations. These weren't invented from nothing in a modern lab. They were extracted and refined versions of things people already knew. Pharmacological research suggests a significant share of prescription drugs in use today are derived from natural compounds first identified through traditional or indigenous medicine, not designed from scratch, but rediscovered. Modern chemistry didn't replace ancient medicine so much as translate it. That's why there's an active, urgent field built around finding what's left. Ethnobotanists spend years living alongside communities that still hold detailed traditional plant knowledge, documenting remedies before the last people who know them pass away without an apprentice to hand it to. Every lost healer is potentially a lost cure, something that took hundreds of generations to refine, gone in a single generation of neglect. So when you take a painkiller, or reach for honey when you have a sore throat, or put a plaster over a cut, you're not doing something new. You're the latest link in a chain stretching back further than written language, further than agriculture, possibly further than modern humans themselves. The tools changed. The instinct never did. So how did ancient humans survive without medicine? The honest answer is that they didn't. They survived because they built medicine piece by piece without ever calling it that. A chewed leaf that dulled pain, a maggot left in a wound on purpose, a hole cut into a skull by someone who'd done it before and knew it could work, a broken man in a cave kept alive for years by people who had nothing to gain from it but his survival. None of it looked like a hospital. All of it worked like one. That thread never actually broke. It just changed shape from memory to writing, from ritual to prescription, from a healer's hands to a pharmacist's shelf. Every time you treat a wound, or care for someone who can't care for themselves, you're not doing something modern at all. You're doing the oldest thing humans ever learned how to do.